Alright everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going deep into the rumors surrounding Windows 12 and an equally dramatic shift happening in the world of operating systems. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why so many people in 2025 are saying that mainstream Linux distros like Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch Linux, openSUSE pop. _OS, and even newer, up-and-coming distributions are not just alternatives, they're actually outpacing Microsoft's Windows in real-world usage, community excitement, developer mindshare, and in some cases, market relevance. Now, before we get into it, let's take a moment to frame what we actually know, what's rumored, and what's part of the fast-moving narrative around Windows 12. There's a lot of confusion right now about Windows 12. Microsoft has hinted at a successor to Windows 11 for years. And as of late 2025, some internal builds and leaks have appeared online. Unlike the carefully marketed releases of the past, like Windows 10 in 2015 or Windows 11 in 2021, Windows 12 has been less about flashy consumer announcements and more of a whisper through developer channels, OEM partner communications, and yes, leaked ISO images that show new UI assets and internal code names. That's exactly what we're doing here, analyzing why Windows 12 rumors exist, what they might mean, and, critically, how and why Linux distros are suddenly becoming more relevant than ever, especially among developers, content creators, system administrators, and even some casual users. To understand the context of Windows 12 rumors in 2025, we have to look at the journey Microsoft has taken over the last decade. With Windows 10, Microsoft promised a unified platform that would be updated continuously. With Windows 11, they introduced a redesigned start menu, integration with Microsoft Teams, and a sharper emphasis on security features like TPM requirements. But on the flip side, Windows 11 also introduced stricter system requirements that frustrated a large portion of the PC community. People with perfectly good hardware found themselves unable to upgrade without workarounds or third-party tools. That frustration seeded a lot of dissatisfaction that, if you're a Linux distro like Ubuntu or Fedora, represented a huge opportunity. Ubuntu, the flagship distro from Canonical, has long been positioned as the most accessible Linux experience for newcomers. But in 2025, Ubuntu has significantly upped its game with hardware support, out-of-the-box drivers, and even proprietary software channels for apps that were once Windows-only. And it's not just Ubuntu, many users have migrated to Pop!_OS from System 76 because of its hardware friendliness, especially on gaming machines and laptops. Pop!_OS has built a reputation for excellent GPU support and hybrid graphics management on both NVIDIA and AMD systems. During the same period, Fedora has emerged as a favorite among developers because of its bleeding-edge packages, frequent updates, and Red Hat sponsorship. Fedora Workstation, in particular, offers GNOME in a way that feels polished, stable, and responsive. Meanwhile, Arch Linux, for those who like to get under the hood, continues to be the go-to choice because of its rolling release model, user-controlled customization, and the extensive Arch User Repository, the AUR, which has become a testing ground for packages that later appear in other distros. In 2025, another distro often discussed in the same breath as Ubuntu and Fedora is openSUSE, especially the Leap and Tumbleweed variants. openSUSE Tumbleweed's rolling release model means that users get very recent software without sacrificing stability. And the YAST configuration tool continues attracting sysadmins, who want a powerful graphical control center and fine-grained system tuning. And then there are more specialized distros like Kali Linux for security professionals, Manjaro for users who want Arch under the hood without the initial steep setup curve, and privacy-oriented distros like Tails and Cubes, which offer secure environments that even Windows struggles to match. But back to Windows 12. The rumors mostly center on three big areas. A redesigned UI, some people refer to Sun Valley 3. Deeper AI integration, possibly tied to Microsoft's investment in AI technology, and the modular core OS that could make updates smaller and faster. Some speculative builds suggest Microsoft is experimenting with a new kernel abstraction layer or tighter sandboxing for apps, which a few people have likened to some of the security features in modern Linux kernels. This has led to conversations that Microsoft may be borrowing concepts long present in Unix-like operating systems, including Linux distros, to stay competitive. It's important to clarify here that Microsoft has not officially acknowledged most of these Windows 12 features publicly. Rumors around UI changes like centered taskbars, rounded corners, Or even new virtual desktop features are based on leaked screenshots and insider chatter, not official documentation. That doesn't mean they're fake. It just means we should treat them cautiously. Meanwhile, Microsoft's official blogs and press releases are focused more on cloud services, AI integration, and enterprise offerings than on consumer-facing OS features. And this is where Linux distros have an advantage. The Linux ecosystem, especially Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch Linux, pop_OS, and openSUSE, is inherently transparent. Every release, every kernel change, every package update is documented publicly. Communities around these distros are collaborative, open, and independent. Contrast that with Microsoft's highly controlled narrative around Windows releases, which sometimes leads to misinformation or confusion among users trying to understand what actually changes versus what's merely a rumor. Another key reason many people feel Linux distros are outpacing Microsoft is due to performance, customization, and hardware efficiency. Let's think about it. Ubuntu's latest release optimized memory handling and graphical performance for both Intel and AMD hardware, while pop_OS leveraged System76's custom tweaks to improve battery life and GPU switching on laptops. Fedora constantly rolls out updated Mesa drivers and Wayland support that keep it on the cutting edge. Arch Linux gives enthusiasts the ability to build their entire system from the ground up. Users who care about pure performance are able to squeeze significantly more out of older hardware with Linux than they can with Windows, especially on machines that struggle under Windows 10 or Windows 11. Then there's the gaming angle, which is especially relevant in 2025. In years past, Windows dominated because of native support for DirectX and game titles optimized for the platform. But with Proton, a compatibility layer developed by Valve that lets Windows games run on Linux distros through Steam, titles that were once Windows-only now run flawlessly on Ubuntu, pop_OS, Fedora, and even Arch Linux. Proton, combined with native Vulkan support and increasingly robust driver support from AMD and NVIDIA, is eroding one of Windows' last major advantages. As a result, gamers are increasingly willing to run Linux as their primary OS, some even dual-booting Ubuntu and Windows, but many making the complete switch to a Linux distro. Development workflows are another story. In software development, especially for cloud, embedded systems, or web backends, Linux distros have long been the standard. Ubuntu and Fedora dominate cloud server images, Arch Linux influences other distros with the latest tools, and openSUSE stability makes it a favorite for enterprise environments. Developers using tools like Docker, Kubernetes, Rust, Go, Python, and Node.js often find Linux distros provide fewer friction points, easier package management, and predictable behavior. Windows has tried to catch up with things like WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux, but WSL is still a layer running inside Windows, not a native Linux environment. As a result, many developers prefer a clean Linux distro install over working inside Windows 10 or Windows 11 or even rumored Windows 12 shells. The situation gets even more interesting when you consider community support. Linux distros each have massive active communities. Ubuntu forums, Fedora mailing lists, Arch Wiki, openSUSE's community repositories, pop_OS Reddit threads. They all offer tutorials, support, and real-time help. When a user runs into a problem, they often find solutions online within minutes. Compare that to Windows, where official support documentation is helpful but often generic, and community support is fragmented across forums, discussion boards, and Q&A sites. Another factor is security. Linux distros traditionally have a smaller malware target profile than Windows, but the real advantage in 2025 comes from architecture. Linux kernel improvements like hardened memory protections, tighter sandboxing tools like CLinux, used in Fedora and other distros, AppArmor, used in Ubuntu, and container-first thinking make many Linux distros appealing for security-conscious users and enterprises. Windows has improved its security stack over the years, but ransomware attacks and supply chain risks have kept many IT administrators wary. This has prompted growth in Linux adoption, not just on enthusiast machines, but on corporate endpoints, embedded devices, and even government systems. At the same time, the open-source nature of Linux distros fosters innovation that a closed ecosystem like Windows can't match at the same pace. A developer anywhere in the world can contribute to Ubuntu's kernel tweaks, Arch Linux's package updates, Fedora's Fedora core changes, or openSUSE JST improvements. This global, decentralized innovation model accelerates development. Projects like Pipewire for audio, Wayland for display servers, and Flatpak or Snap for cross-distro app packaging are moving fast because they're open. Microsoft's internal development cycles, especially around a big monolithic OS release like Windows 12, are comparatively slow, deliberate, and closed until release time. Community sentiment is now a driving force in user adoption, and it's worth discussing how that sentiment spread. Around 2023 and 2024, adoption of Linux distros began rising sharply, thanks in part to frustrations with Windows 11 updates that sometimes caused system instability, driver compatibility woes, and forced hardware requirements. Streamers and tech influencers started showcasing their gaming rigs running pop_OS or Ubuntu with Proton, achieving performance levels comparable to native Windows installs. Developers live-streamed Arch Linux builds tuned for performance. Enterprises began to experiment seriously with Fedora and openSUSE server deployments. By 2025, the narrative had shifted considerably. Instead of Linux distros being an alternative, they became a primary choice for users who care about performance, control, and openness. This isn't to say everyone has abandoned Windows, far from it. Windows still holds a massive install base, especially in enterprise, education, and consumer markets. But the rate of growth for Linux distros, especially in key demographics like developers and tech enthusiasts, outpaced the excitement around Windows 12's rumored feature set. Now let's discuss the rumors themselves in more detail. One persistent rumor about Windows 12 is that Microsoft is planning deeper AI integration at the OS level, not just a chatbot or sidebar, but AI-assisted system optimization, predictive task scheduling, and OS-level AI features built into the task manager and file system. Some insiders say Microsoft wants to use machine learning to adapt system performance based on user behavior. That's a bold idea, and on paper it sounds compelling, but it raises questions about privacy, telemetry, and processing overhead. Many users are skeptical, wondering if this AI integration will make systems slower or less predictable, especially on older hardware. Contrast this with Linux distros like Fedora and Ubuntu, which allow users to choose AI tools manually, install only what they want, and keep telemetry off by default. Developers can experiment with local AI models on Arch Linux or pop_OS without worrying about background services that are opaque. That's a philosophical difference. Windows 12 rumors talk about AI embedded by default, while Linux distros talk about AI tools as optional user-controlled components. That resonates with many users who want control over their systems. Another rumor is about a modular Windows core. The idea here is that Microsoft might break the OS into smaller components that can be updated independently, similar in philosophy to how many Linux distributions handle packages. This would allow far more frequent security patches without waiting for big feature updates. If true, this could be a meaningful improvement for Windows, but it would represent a major architectural shift for Microsoft, and a tacit acknowledgement that the old, monolithic update model was insufficient. Meanwhile, Linux distros have been doing modular updates for decades. Every package from the kernel to the CLI tools can be updated independently through the package manager. That is not a rumor, it's reality in Linux distros like Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch Linux, and openSUSE. There are also UI rumors, center taskbar, new animations, redesigned file explorer, new themes, but it's worth asking, do these cosmetic changes actually matter to users who care about performance and control? For many in the Linux community, the answer is no. Distros like KDE Neon, Fedora KDE, Manjaro KDE, and even Ubuntu with GNOME extensions offer UI customization that far surpasses what Windows can do without third-party tools. If a user wants a dock, tiling window management, radically different themes, or multiple desktops with custom gestures, they can do it in a Linux distro today without waiting for a rumored Windows 12 update. Another aspect of the rumor mill revolves around licensing and pricing. Some leaks suggest Microsoft might shift how Windows 12 licenses work, possibly tying it more tightly to cloud subscriptions or hardware partnerships. That's fueled skepticism because, historically, Windows licensing has been complex and sometimes expensive for power users. Linux distros, by contrast, are free open source and able to be installed on virtually any compatible hardware. Users can experiment, break the system, fix it, and move on, all without licensing fees. For budget-conscious users, that's a massive advantage. So where does that leave the average user in 2025? It leaves a landscape where the discussion around Windows 12 is nearly as influential as the product itself. People are talking about what Windows 12 might be, what it might fix, or what it might introduce. Meanwhile, Linux distros like Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch Linux, Pop_OS, openSUSE, Manjaro, and others are already shipping updates that users can actually install today. That's a huge psychological shift, speculation versus reality. There's also a broader cultural shift happening. A generation of new developers and tech professionals are coming up with roots in Linux. Universities, teaching operating systems, networking, and systems programming are often using Ubuntu or Fedora as their teaching environment. Tech companies deploying cloud infrastructure default to CentOS streams, Ubuntu LTS, or Fedora images because they understand and control those environments better. Kubernetes clusters run on Linux nodes. Containers are built for Linux first. This ecosystem momentum cannot be underestimated. It impacts how people think about the future of computing, and by extension, how they view Windows 12. And let's be clear, this comparison isn't about hating Microsoft. There are many things Microsoft does well: Azure, development tools like Visual Studio, enterprise support contracts, Office 365 integration, and cross-platform frameworks like NetMaui. But for the specific domain of desktop operating systems, the narrative in 2025 is being shaped by Linux distros because they represent something fundamentally different: freedom, transparency, customization, and community empowerment. Microsoft has strengths, of course. If Windows 12 delivers significant performance gains, genuine innovations in security, and meaningful features that improve daily productivity, that will matter. Enterprises will adopt it because they have large installed bases and specific app dependencies. Gamers who rely on native DirectX titles may continue using Windows for that reason alone. And for certain professional applications that are Windows exclusive, Windows still holds ground. But if rumors of AI being forced rather than optional, if modularization is slow to arrive, and if licensing shifts increase complexity rather than simplify it, many users may choose alternatives. They might choose to boot into Ubuntu for everyday tasks, use Fedora for development, spin up Arch Linux for customization, rely on Pop_OS for gaming rigs, or use openSUSE on reliable workstations. They might even switch entirely and never look back. In closing, let's imagine a scenario where someone watching this video wants to make a choice right now. They're curious about Windows 12 but also hearing a ton about Linux distros outperforming it in daily life. What should they do? The answer isn't binary. It's about understanding priorities. If you need specific Windows-only applications, if you work in an environment where Windows is standard, or if you're tied to workflows that depend on Windows software, then Windows 12, once released, might still be your primary OS. But if you want control, performance, community support, open-source freedom, and the ability to tailor your environment down to the pixel and process, then trying out one or more Linux distros today makes a lot more sense. Install Ubuntu alongside your current system. Try Fedora in a VM. Set up Arch Linux on a spare drive. Play games on Pop_OS using Proton. Manage servers with openSUSE. Each of these distros offers a unique strength, and they are all evolving faster in many respects than the Windows 12 rumor cycle itself. So that's the story behind the Windows 12 rumors and the rise of Linux distros in 2025. The rumors are intriguing, the speculation is wild, but the reality is that Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch Linux, Pop_OS, openSUSE, and others are not waiting for a future release. They're already here, already powerful, and already gaining ground. If you found this video helpful, smash that like button, subscribe for more deep dives like this, and drop a comment telling me which Linux distro you're using or thinking about trying next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.